Second. Okay, good afternoon, Niles. We are here today live with Lee Schlesinger from Winesellers and Kimmy from Athletico and our chamber board, and we are getting ready for our wine tasting. So, welcome.
Thanks, Alicia.
Lee?
I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a good excuse to get together with some people virtually and taste some wine.
Sounds great. What are we starting with today? Or you want to tell us a little about Winesellers, Lee?
Yeah, well, I always like to start with a little bubbly. So if people out there have some bubbly, let's go ahead and pour, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the wine and get into a little more detail after some introductions here. But we picked 4 wines today, a sparkling, a white, and 2 reds. And the sparkling wine we picked is a Prosecco, which is coming from Italy. And we're pretty familiar with Prosecco. It's seen a huge amount of growth in the United States, double digits year over year for the past 5+ years or so. It's generally categorized as just an off-dry, kind of fruit-forward, sparkling wine, easy drinking. People love it. It's like the perfect brunch wine. I like making mimosas with it too because it has a little sweetness that blends into the orange juice. So a really versatile kind of fun wine.
Nice.
And
cheers.
So here's to the start of our tasting.
And I'm going to remind our viewers that are tasting along, please feel free to comment when you like something or you have a question. Lee is here to answer our questions and guide us along. So please join in with us.
Yeah, let's make it as conversational and fun as possible.
That is good.
The kind of unfun stuff is some housekeeping stuff. So why am I here today? Well, I'm here today because Winesellers is a company that's been in Niles since February of 2009. We were double digits year over year for the past.
That's my fault.
The kind of unfun.
Sorry about that, guys. I'm trying to share this, and it started talking to me. Lee,
so I feel like we have to say, make sure you turn your radio down.
I am so familiar with that. I've been doing virtual tastings. So if you actually go to our Facebook page or we have a YouTube page, and we'll get into some social media, our handles there, it's at Winesellers Ltd. But we have pre-recorded virtual tastings up there from probably 20 or 30 different of our suppliers. So if you guys are interested in more of that kind of stuff, we got pre-recorded things up there. So I'm familiar with all the technological issues that can come up in StreamYard and Zoom. So a little bit about Winesellers. We started in 1977. It's now in the 2nd generation of family ownership. I mentioned that we moved to Niles in February of 2009. We moved from Can we mention neighboring peoples, or should we?
Absolutely.
All right. So we moved over from Skokie, and we're super happy in Niles. So
that means we stole you from Skokie. Sorry about that.
We did steal us from Skokie, and we were right next to the mall there, and a great location. But I think we're happier where we are now, despite being located at the mall over there. So we're also right next to our 2 wholesalers that we work with in the States. So let's give them a shout out. It's Connoisseur Wines and Heritage Wine Cellars, which are on either side of our offices there on Caldwell Avenue and Howard.
Excellent.
So that's some more Niles shout outs. So
who knew there were that many wine distributors in Niles?
Yeah, there's at least 2, and 2 very good ones too. So we've worked with them since we've worked with Heritage since 1977, and Connoisseur Connoisseur's been around for, I want to say, about 15 years or so. We've had some wines over there too. They're sister businesses. They're related to each other, so it's kind of all one big happy family. We're a family-owned company that kind of works with other family businesses, including our family-owned wineries and estates, which we'll touch on here today. What do we do? We're importers, so we act as like the commercial arm for a winery. The core competency for a winery would be to grow grapes and turn it into wine. And then the commercial side of things is totally a different skill set. So we take that over and work for them as their commercial arm for the United States. That's government compliance, logistics, AP, AR, sales, and marketing. So that's kind of what we do. So our direct supply chain is going to a distributor who then sells to retail and restaurants in each state. So we get a little bit more local as we move down that supply chain.
Okay.
So that's kind of the boring background, but what we try to do is make sure that our brands are represented at all levels, the consumer, the retail, the restaurant, as well as our wholesalers / distributors. And so I was recently promoted to vice president, and I take care of kind of the educational piece. So you've got the educational mouthpiece for Winesellers here. So we'll move into the more fun stuff, which is the liquid and the history that's associated to that and the culture.
So Steve, I'm just going to pause you. Lee, I'm going to pause you because we have a question from Steve who said he's just starting. Is this celebratory or dessert wine, or does it matter? We're talking about the Prosecco, I think.
Yeah, most people relegate sparkling wine to special occasions, but I think it's really an everyday type of occasion. I mentioned brunch. This is a great brunch wine. And I think I gave you some food pairings earlier this week, and I really think that prosciutto wrapped melon would be perfect with this kind of thing.
That's what I just put in my mouth.
Yeah.
I got some too.
Gorgonzola stuffed bacon wrapped dates would be perfect with this, but really anything salty, slightly sweet. I even gave you, it does have a little bit of sweetness and enough fruitiness that it could stand up to kind of like lighter desserts. So I gave you like strawberry shortcake or anything with angel food cake and fruit kind of stuff would work with it too.
Excellent. Excellent. And Lori, I'm glad you're here with your daughters. Welcome.
Hey, girls.
All right. So that's kind of what we do. I think that's enough housekeeping there. We are on all the socials. So we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Our website is listed there at winesellersltd.com. We have a YouTube site as well, which I mentioned. So we're super active on all the socials. Our hashtag is there at Winesellers Ltd. So any further interest about what Winesellers is and our brands, you can always go there. And I actually put a little bit of my contact information at the end of the presentation. So feel free to reach out to Winesellers or me personally.
Excellent.
All right, let's dig into a little bit. Oh, wait, hold on. So a little bit more about Winesellers. So we import from wines and cider. Cider's maybe 3 to 5% of our business tops, but we work in 13 different countries with about 73 different wineries.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. So we represent a lot of wines and ciders, about 500 that we warehouse domestically here.
Wow.
And we sell about 800,000 cases a year here in the United States.
Wow. That's a lot of wine.
That's a lot of wine. Yeah, that's like a good weekend in my household. No, I'm just kidding. So let's get into, so some of our top brands include Santa Julia, which we'll taste their Reserve Malbec tonight, an Italian brand called La Fiera, a French brand called Montgravé, Famiglia Zuccardi, which is another Argentine brand, Tiamo, we're actually tasting right now, the Prosecco, Sea Pearl, New Zealand, Les Charmel, another French brand, Masfi, which is a sparkling cava from Spain, and Gran Passione, another Italian brand. So we kind of mix it up. Those are our top 10 brands. So if you've seen those on your shelf, that's me, or us, should I say.
Excellent.
A lot of what we're going to work with, like the Prosecco we're tasting now, is certified organic. So we work with a lot of producers. Our smaller producers tend to be very concerned about, obviously, their sustainability. And their sustainability because they own their vineyards and they want to have it for the next generation and the generation after that. So many of the wineries that we work with are committed to green, as the slide says, with all sorts of different certifications, not just organic certifications, but other types of certifications out there too.
Lee, talk to me about this certification vegan wine, because wine's made from grapes. So isn't all wine vegan?
You would think so, but there are fining agents out there called isinglass, which is fish bladder, and they're proteins generally like egg whites and fish bladder that we use generally on red wines. And this was a practice that's going a little bit further away. I mean, now we have other things that we can use in place of animal products that will do the same thing. But these proteins were positively charged, and they pull out negatively charged things in the wine, which tend to stick in solution. So they were used as fining agents. So fish bladder and egg whites were typically used in red wines for fining agents.
So let me ask you this. I have a niece who's vegan, and so I do try to be very careful when I'm serving her things. Would a red wine tell me on the back whether it's vegan friendly or not?
So infrequently, because we're not under FDA.
Okay.
We're beverage alcohol. We don't have to put an ingredient list on the back, and there's been a lot of ruckus. That's a whole other kind of Zoom session for us, but we don't have to list our ingredients on the back of our labels. So there are wines out there that have, that aren't necessarily vegan, that might have other additives, things that you wouldn't imagine besides fermented grape juice that's in there.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
So interesting. I never would have known that either.
Right. Yeah.
We actually just got some certifications. There was no official certification for vegan wine, but our Argentine winery just got some certifications from third party. But a lot of our wines will list, especially the wines that we sell to Whole Foods. We do a lot of their kind of control labels or their private labels, labels specifically for them, and we'll put vegan specifically on the outside of the label, so you can look for that.
Okay. Good to know.
Whole Foods, yeah. Let's see. So let's jump into Italy. Italy is one of the top, if not the top. It vies for 1 or 2 in the world in terms of total production. And if I had my druthers, it might be the country of origin. If I was on a desert island and somebody said, you only get to choose wine from one country, what country would that be? There's arguments to be had, and I think there's a strong argument here for Italy because of not only just the quality, but the incredible diversity that comes off this boot here.
Nice.
So we're going to go up to the kind of, let's see, can you guys see my cursor? No?
Yeah.
Okay, super. So we're going to go up in this area in the Veneto, to Valdo Biadeni, a region that's known for growing a grape variety called the Galera and turning it into a sparkling wine called Prosecco.
Okay.
So this is what it looks like. We're up in the hillside of the Alps. I mean, incredibly beautiful, mostly south-facing to capture as much exposure of sunlight. A little elevated up into the hillsides in order for cooler temperatures. So you get the right exposure with the right temperatures for this grape variety. Really picturesque. I use this picture quite a bit. This isn't necessarily where our vineyards are, but our vineyards are equally as beautiful and also certified organic, as I mentioned.
Yeah, that's heavenly.
That's awesome. Tiamo is an organic brand, so everything that's in the Tiamo range, with one minor exception, is certified organic. And we also do kegs of Tiamo. We do cans of Tiamo, and we actually came out with a Tiamo organic spritz recently.
We need to go back. Did you say kegs of Tiamo?
Kegs of wine, yes.
Okay. Sorry, just checking.
Yeah.
I got distracted by some comments, and I was like, "Wait, did we switch to beer?"
Yeah, so we do. There's been a movement towards sustainability. We kind of talked about, and when we're shipping glass, that's not sustainable. It's a big carbon footprint, and it increases costs. So what we're doing is we're actually more ecologically sound, typically by bringing kegs over, whether it's kegging it here or having it kegged there and bringing it over. You actually reduce the amount of packaging that's used. It weighs less, and you bring over more wine for the same cost and the same carbon footprint. So it's also less expensive. And typically we find this used in restaurants. So the on-premise will use that. And you'll see some restaurants, it's very spotty where it's taken off. Very strong on the West Coast, pretty darn strong on the East Coast. And then kind of your urban kind of CDI, your heavy CDI, your city density index places are kind of picking up on that. But again, your per ounce cost on keg wine is typically less than your $7.50, and you have less waste in packaging.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. So Ti amo Prosecco. Does anybody out there in the universe have any questions on this, or should we continue talking about what we find we like in the wine, or how do you want to talk about our wines here?
Let's talk about what we like in the wine. Can anyone care to share with us, Miranda or Steve or Lori? I'm hoping Christine has found her way on here. We've been texting. Christine, if you're on here, can you comment for me? She asked me if she could call me. I told her I didn't think that was going to play well. Okay, so no comments. So nobody likes the Prosecco?
I don't.
Kimmy, what do you? I don't think so either. Kimmy, what do you think of it?
I'm a big fan. I think that it's like the perfect balance of sweet. Sometimes too sweet of a, mimosa or Bellini, or too sweet for me is a little too much. This is a great balance. I have a wedding coming up next weekend where it's my cousin that's getting married, and we're in charge of like putting together some brunch type of items while we're getting her ready and getting ready. And I was going to peg myself to bring the Bellinis and mimosas, and I think this might be the Prosecco that I choose to bring to mix, because I love it. I think it's a great balance. I don't think it's too sweet. I think it's perfect.
There you go. And Miranda says they have paired this with peaches and blueberries, and it's delightful.
Yeah, that's
and
a nice story.
Lori tells us they love it. And Steve says he likes it a lot, light, very drinkable, and not too sweet. Okay, so it sounds like we've got thumbs up on this one.
Yeah, and Prosecco comes generally in two kind of sweetness levels. This says extra dry, but it's really on the drier side of extra dry. Extra dry, and brut. So if you look on the label, if you see the word brut, it's generally drier than if it says extra dry. And
okay, Kimmy, I'm going to tap out for just a minute. I'm going to call Christine. I'll be right back.
Of course.
Kim, looks like it's you and me. So
all right.
So the kind of the difference here between champagne and Prosecco tends to be obviously where it's grown, the grape varieties, but also the way that we produce it is different because we're looking for a different profile. This isn't meant to compete with champagne. It's meant to be kind of like in the spectrum of the sparkling wine world, and is meant to be fruity and floral. There's a lot, for me, there's these white flowers, kind of citrus blossom aroma that blend into the fruitiness of it. So I don't consider this like competing with champagne or even cava, which is more like champagne, but really kind of stands on its own. And I think people really like it because it's super approachable and super fun.
I would agree with that.
I'm back.
Cool. So shall we move in? We're already 18 minutes into this. Shall we move in?
Yeah, let's move along.
All right.
Okay. And our white is the Fire Road, right?
Yeah, we're going to move to New Zealand. So here's a picture of the two islands. It gets confusing because we talk about places in New Zealand, and kind of the most well-known is New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Is really, if anybody knew anything about wine from New Zealand, you would go, I know New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And it generally comes from this region here, which is at the north end of the South Island called Marlborough. And that's where we're going to focus here today with Fire Road. You want to hold up the label for us there, and kind of like, it's got a kind of a unique, fun label to it.
It is fun.
And unfortunately named after an event which probably wasn't so fun if you were there on Boxing Day of 2000 in Blenheim. That's the main city there. And there was a fire on December 26th of that day. And they call it Fire Road because residents of the town actually came out and threw buckets of water and hosed and dug fire ditches in order to stop the fire. It burned like 6,000 acres.
Oh, wow.
So they renamed all the people that lived on this road Fire Road, and that's where we get the name for the wine. Kind of the same community spirit that went into that event is kind of the patchwork that we use in order to produce this wine. So a lot of different vineyard sites are used to produce this very typical New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And I'll let you guys, here, I got a nice picture here for us to see what it looks like.
Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah, and generally where we're growing here is you see it, it's very maritime. These islands are not super wide, so you're exposed to a lot of kind of like wet weather, and so where we are, we tend to be tucked away in these little valleys. So here we're in the valley, and you can see kind of from one side to the other. We're standing in the foothills of one side, looking through the valley into the other side of the mountain ranges. So that's where we're in these little protected nooks on the eastern side of that island, as most of the currents kind of like move over the top of the west to east.
I'm always intrigued by like location of the grapes and where they have to be grown, and I'm always fascinated by that, because it truly does make such a different taste in the wine, regardless of what it's fermented with, or the processing with the different flavors. But I'm so intrigued by it.
Yeah, we always talk about place, people, and time. So the place, you obviously, it makes a huge difference if you grow the same grape on this side of the road or that side of the road. The soil types could be different, the exposure could be different. Lots of variables play into that. So specificity of place is kind of plays a very important role, even if it's just, hey, the region of Marlborough versus maybe the Loire Valley of France, Sauvignon Blanc. And then the interpretation by the person that's making the wine, we do have a hand in what goes into that bottle. Typically, we like to say we steer the wine into the bottle, and the wine is made in the vineyard. But I kind of mentioned that there are additives that people will use and shortcut, and not even things quite that obvious, but selection of yeast types or fermentation temperatures or vessels, and kind of natural things that aren't necessarily additives, but decisions in the winemaking process that can change the wine. And then obviously the vintage itself, like what happened in that year, is a reflected into the bottle too. So, Kim, do you have the Sauvignon Blanc with you there?
I don't. So this was the one that was too popular, but Alicia has it. So
and true confessions, I am not a white drinker, but this is very tasty.
And what do we notice in that wine? I'm going to put you on the spot here while we're live streaming and ask you, what you're getting out of that wine, and if it doesn't have to be too complex, if it's fruity or if it's oaky or if it's acidic or if it's sweet.
I'm getting fruity.
Yeah, very typical. We get kind of grapefruit.
Yeah.
That's one of the.
That's why I like this.
It's a huge marker for New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and they also say things like gooseberry. But very tart, maybe tart tropical fruits, underripe tropical fruits as well in there. Some passion fruit or guava, underripe maybe. And then also typically this herbaceousness that's typical for Sauvignon Blanc, and really exaggerated in the New Zealand style. So if you smell that herbaceousness, gooseberry, grapefruit, and really fruity, and there should be good acidity in there to keep that wine lifted. That's really the hallmark for New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
Excellent. Yeah, and I have paired it with some goat cheese.
Perfect.
And pita crackers, and it's quite tasty.
Really, really aromatic, like grassy grapefruit all the way. And we find, as I mentioned, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc has grown as a category, like double digits, sometimes even up into 20% year on year. I think because people really like this kind of exuberant style. I say it's even more expressive than the Prosecco.
Sorry, guys. For those of you that know me, Dad is tasting along with us. So he realized he was a glass behind. I had to go get him some Sauvignon Blanc.
You do what you need to do there.
This is very tasty. I could have this with some shrimp, I think. I'd be quite happy.
I think even half shell, like oysters, are perfect with this kind of thing. Half shell items, shrimp, seafoods and cream sauces, I kind of mentioned. But I think even like roast chicken, and it's super with vegetables. So if you're vegetarian and you got a bunch of different vegetarian dishes, this kind of thing stands up to a lot of veggies, which some wines don't necessarily play all that well with.
Okay, guys, I'm not putting Grandpa on camera, so stop it.
But he's so cute.
Dad, the viewers want to know, do you like this one? What do you think of it? It's okay, he says.
Is he like you, a red wine drinker?
He is like me. He is a red wine drinker. Ooh. Miranda's got shrimp with it. Excellent.
All right. Any other thoughts out there in the internet universe?
Yeah, anybody else in cyberspace? Lori, you guys were drinking Sauvignon Blanc the other night when we were out, I think, or was it Pinot? I'm going to wait a second and see if Lori heard me.
And kind of our fun fact, I know we're tasting Sauvignon Blanc, but if you're interested in other wines from New Zealand, they do Pinot Noir really nicely too. We're talking about specificity of location, and that location is generally, like at least 50% kind of climatic conditions, and certain grapes kind of go together. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, Sauvignon Blanc, which can deal with kind of cooler climates, gets along well with Pinot Noir, which also likes, for red wines, relatively cool climate too. So New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, also great New Zealand Pinot Noir. And really, if you go onto the North Island, they do Chardonnay and Bordeaux varietals and some really great Syrah too.
So, Lee, we've got somebody who was not able to get the Fire Road. They were out of it, but they purchased another wine, Claus Henry Petit Claus.
Petit Clos. I don't know that. It sounds French.
Okay.
And, stylistically, there is difference between French Sauvignon Blanc and New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
And Lori's drinking another Sauvignon from Marlborough.
Yeah, I think we're talking generally enough where I think Lori will be able to identify that grassy, grapefruit, gooseberry, underripe tropical fruit profile that I was mentioning.
Excellent.
We're not north side, it's Marlborough. So
Yes.
Steve is in Marlborough, not French.
Marlborough,
So,
not French.
he should taste and Babbage, another great producer down there. All Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, and one of my complaints is that maybe the wines have too much in common, that you could probably pick almost and like. This is not good sales technique, obviously, because I want you to pick only Fire Road.
So if anyone from Winesellers is watching, cover your ears.
That a lot of the wines tend to taste a little uniform. There's a lot of uniformity to what they're doing and what they're looking, because it's a victim of its own commercial success, is that, hey, people like this style, so let's give them more of that style.
Sure.
So that's one of my complaints, but I think that there's enough diversity out there where you can certainly find wines that have different expressions, but really that prototypical profile is what we're talking about. Hopefully Steve and Lori found that kind of same stuff. I judge it all against Cloudy Bay. Yeah, Cloudy Bay was one of the first movers out there, owned by a very large company that brought it into the United States pretty early on, and was, it's kind of like saying, I like Santa Margherita Pinot Grigio, and maybe that is your benchmark, but it was here first, and that's kind of the benchmark for people.
Okay, Steve, I'll have to bring you a bottle of Fire Road, because I would not call this a meh version.
Good. And everybody's got different. The other thing is here, nothing's absolute. We're talking about a lot of subjectivity when it comes to wine. So we can agree to disagree and still be friends and enjoy whatever it is we enjoy.
As long as it's wine.
As long as it's wine. And especially if the wine sellers imported it.
There you go. Even better.
So if there are no other questions, maybe we want to pop on over to, we're going to go to Spain and taste some red wine.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Yes,
So,
ma'am. Okay, where's my
So,
Spanish?
Kim kind of hit it. She stole a little bit of my thunder, or at least predicted what I was going to do, which is show a map every time I move somewhere. So here we have a map of Spain. You see the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, France. Obviously, the Pyrenees separate France from Spain. We're going to go to the north, just south of Bilbao. And when we think about Bilbao and San Sebastian, we think about, which are right along that coastline, we think about seafood and seafood restaurants and cool maritime type of things. But we're going to go over the Sierra Cantabres, which is a mountain range which separates all that kind of ocean influence. And we're going to look at this beautiful skyline. You can see the Sierras right there.
Look at
And
that.
you can see how it's holding back kind of the clouds.
Yeah.
And that's super typical. And this is actually one of my own pictures I took there 2 years ago. And it's just so demonstrative of what it looks like there. You're in this valley, and the Ebro Valley kind of runs here from kind of like the north down south towards the east, and you start dropping in elevation. What we're going to taste is wine from this upper region here, Rioja Alta, and the styles do change quite a bit as you move further lower elevations. Lower elevations generally means warmer climate. Warmer climate means riper grapes, a little fuller, a little fruitier, maybe less tannin and less acid. But let's go ahead and talk about Carlos Ceres as a producer. This was started by a gentleman named Carlos Ceres, who, there he is, 1896. So he was a Bordelaise guy. He was from Bordeaux on the other side of the Pyrenees that I mentioned, making wine in Bordeaux. And this thing happened in the late 19th century, mid to late 19th century, called phylloxera. And phylloxera is a root louse that came over from the United States and destroyed vineyards. Pretty much made everybody react and replant, and almost destroyed the industry. And people moved from places that were affected by phylloxera to places that they could grow grapes and make wine. And Charles, actually, right? He's French. Carlos moved to some place that resembled the place that he knew, which was Bordeaux. And he was a key character here in the history of Rioja, one of the founders of the Rioja Export Association. But most of these guys are French, and the French brought with them technology, techniques, and really what we focus on generally is barrel aging. But they brought other technology with them and really changed the landscape of what happened in Rioja. So modern Rioja really starts with a French invasion of winemakers, Carlos Ceres being one of them. And there are some great old pictures that they have here. That is not present day winery. I made sure to include.
That's a great picture, though.
Yeah, you see a winery like that these days, you probably want to say, this is what the winery looks like kind of today. It's one of the most immaculate wineries I've ever stepped into. This is a personal picture. This is no glossy, great shot, but is for me just, brings it personally for me. But the barrel room, this is one of the barrel rooms for us, and just had a nice image for me. The winery itself, here's what the wine. Look at the shine on the floor, and that's
look at that.
Wow.
That's not just
you can see reflections.
Yeah. So everything's really well maintained, but they're making classic styled wines. The wines, yes. Well, we'll talk about vineyards next, which is important, obviously. So they have 60 hectares, which is 150 acres of a single vineyard, which is one of the largest single plots in all of Rioja. So some of the wine is coming from here. They also purchase some wine, which is very typical in the region. They purchase grapes. Sorry, they don't purchase wine. They purchase grapes. And they make, there's a shot of their vineyard there. This is, you can tell that it's after, or actually at harvest. It looks like it's after harvest because you can tell the color of the foliage and how overcast it is. This is typical winter, but summers are sunny and warm. Okay. And here is harvest.
Oh, look how pretty.
And kind of the lineup is we have, they make what we call young wines, which are relatively unoaked wines, and then the classic wines or the barrel wines, which are designated as Crianza Reserva, Grand Reserva, which see more aging in oak. We're going to have one of these younger, fresher wines, which is the Carlos Ceres Tempranillo.
Do a red. Are you ready for it? I gotta rinse your glass.
Hooking that up.
I am.
And so 100% Tempranillo from old vines.
Dad likes his stemless wine glasses, so we are.
Right on. I see Steve's already asking some good questions here.
What do we got, Steve?
He wants to know if it's always Tempranillo. It is not always Tempranillo. Tempranillo is the dominant red grape, accounting for about 80% of all red wine plantings in Rioja. So most of the grapes, or most of the wines that you see from Rioja are Tempranillo based, with small amounts of other grapes added for complexity, for color, for this, for that. Most of the time for structure, tannin, acid, but for further complexity as well too. So, Steve, good question. This happens to be 100% Tempranillo, and so you'll get to taste unadulterated Tempranillo, and it comes in a nice, convenient twist top.
Love the twist.
Love it.
Makes it a little easier.
So, Lee, I first heard of Tempranillos only about, I don't know, let's say 5 years ago. Are they newer? Have they been around forever?
Yeah, it's really, if you, you've probably had Tempranillo and not know you had Tempranillo. In the old world, meaning Europe, all the wines are named after the place they come from, and you're expected to know the grape variety, right?
Oh, okay.
Or not even care what the grape variety is, really just know the typicity for the region. So, hey, I have a Bordeaux, and I know what Bordeaux is supposed to taste like, and whatever the ingredients are, meaning what's the cepage, what's the composition percentage-wise of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, etc., is inconsequential. It doesn't really matter to me. I know the producer, I know the year, and I know that this wine is going to be good because I've had wine from them before. And this is really details that Americans kind of invented. It's a marketing technique that Americans came up with in the 70s. This focus and hyper attention to grape variety. And, for good or bad, we've melded both. So the old world has wines that will label varietally, and the new world will rarely, you see red blends that don't necessarily mention grape varieties on it. But, on the back label, we typically see most time on every grape, on every wine, the grape varieties. So it has kind of proliferated backwards because we are the number one destination for wine, the number one wine consuming nation in the world in total volume. We took that over fairly recently, and hopefully we maintain it. I know I'm doing my part.
I was going to say, may have been my fault, but.
And you have the Tempranillo. What do you think there?
I really, really like this. I feel like I get a ton of different flavors. I get a little oaky, a little almost like a rich smoky, but then I get a hint of berry.
Yeah, I get a lot of that berry. I get strawberry for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Tempranillo is really known for producing, if you had one fruit descriptor, strawberry, but red fruits, red berries, so kind of raspberry. It tends to produce something that will also show some level of spice. I get a little bit of spice out of this. Cinnamony, kind of maybe clovey type of spice. And also sometimes earthy or leathery notes, which may not be so predominant here. A lot of this stuff that we're talking about will come out with time. Maybe some more barrel aging or more time in barrel will accentuate some of these other things. But for me, this is a pretty fruit-forward wine that's giving me a lot of strawberry, berry, kind of with some spicy accents.
Yeah. On the spectrum of reds, it feels like a lighter red to me. than maybe that Malbec or a Chianti.
Yeah, so that's kind of why we picked this one. I think it's because it was a more medium-bodied style. When I think of lighter-bodied reds, I think like Pinot Noir. Does the dog want some wine too?
We're going to mute me for a minute. Hang on, guys.
No problem. So when we think of lighter-bodied red wines, I typically think of things like Pinot Noir. And
I was going to say the exact same thing. Yep.
Yeah, I find this maybe a little weightier and a little bit more intense than Pinot Noir, but not much. I mean, there's definitely a spectrum of kind of like intensity or weight or body or fullness that we could put this on. And Tempranillo really varies from, I would say, medium-bodied up to can be very, very full-bodied red wine. So it depends, like we've talked about, where it's from, who made it, and maybe even sometimes vintage. But you can go to other parts of Spain, and Tempranillo is planted all over Spain. It is the number one most widely planted red grape in Spain. I'm going to go out on a small limb on that one without double checking my facts, but it's very widely planted. And if you go to other regions, a place called Toro, for instance, or Ribera de Duero, where you have maybe a warmer climate, you're going to find more intensity. And these wines from Toro or Ribera de Duero will be certainly full-bodied and generally see a lot more oak. I like these wines. Tempranillo is very versatile. We say it reflects its terroir, meaning the place where it's grown, very, very well. So it's adapted to where it's grown.
Christine, you've got a group together. What do you guys think of the Tempranillo? I'll give you a minute to comment here.
So food pairings, like with this wine, we were talking generally about what I would pair with, kind of like Tempranillo or maybe even this wine a little bit. We were talking about stuff off the grill, and maybe it's not full enough to slap with a rich steak, or
right.
I think it'd do well with burgers and maybe even like grilled chicken off the smoky charcoal.
Do it barbecue chicken, sure.
Yeah, little barbecue chicken, or I think a simple grilled chicken, because that barbecue sauce, once you start saucing up different things,
too heavy.
You change that. I often tell, or people will. Sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't, but I think it's not totally unrealistic to say you should pair things by the sauces rather than by the protein or whatever's going on.
Okay.
I mentioned kind of the fire road and cream sauces. I think that the richness from that cream sauce would counterbalance with the acidity from the fire road Sauvignon Blanc.
Jenny mentions they got the Manchego cheese.
Yep, that was on the list there. So for sure, Manchego is a classic pairing here with some Tempranillo, and I think that this particular bottling would go well. Some fuller-bodied wines may not go as well with that style of cheese.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is the St. Paul Cheese Shop in Niles? I gotta see if Jen.
The St. Paul Cheese Shop is not in Niles. It is in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Oh, okay.
It's possible my children are on here.
Ah, I see.
And they are in St. Paul.
Very good. Is there anything to the grade on Spanish bottles? What does Reserva mean? Yeah, so it definitely matters. There are different levels. We talk about crianza, which has some level of oak aging and some level of holding back, meaning we hold the bottle for some period of time before we release it. So as we move from crianza to Reserva to Grand Reserva, it gets longer time in oak and longer time being held back. It depends on where you are in Spain. Rioja has its own set of rules. Other DOs, these denomination of origin or regions, have their own specific laws to it. But as you move up that level, it does mean that it's spent more time in a barrel and more time in a bottle before being released. And what that does for me is obviously sometimes you pick up some flavor from the barrel, which is dependent on the producer's choice of what types of barrels they use. But for me, allows this wine to age and you pick up what we call tertiary flavors, meaning flavors that happen after the primary and secondary, which primary are stuff that we get out of the grape itself, and secondary, what the winemaker does to it. Tertiary is what happens in the magic that happens in barrel and bottle after some period of time. So I mentioned to Kim that, like the spice, sometimes we would call secondary flavors because we're getting it from the barrel. And then leather and earth might be developing just in the bottle itself. And that's what we call tertiary flavors. And you're getting more tertiary flavors. And you're also allowing some of those primary characteristics to settle out. So some of the fruitiness may not be as obvious. Some of the structural components, so acid and tannins, so the wine mellows a little bit. So the wine can be softer, more complex, more elegant as we move up that range from this young wine to a Crianza Reserva, Grand Reserva. That was a long-winded response to Steve's question.
That was a nice explanation.
Thorough.
Christine says she's enjoying this because Christine's a red girl like me. But the girls all loved the first white. So good to know. I'm going to take that
Excellent.
out of there. Okay. Are we moving along to the Santa Julia? Is that how you pronounced it?
Yeah, Julia Zuccardi will answer by Julia or Julia. She's Argentine, so the J has a little hardness to it, but she actually goes by Juli, is what her friend call her. So Julia Zuccardi is a real person. The winery was named after her by her father shortly after her birth in the 80s. Let's leave it at that. I won't give away her exact age, but she was born in the 80s. And before we kind of dig into, you guys pour the wine and start tasting the wine while I give you a little background, I got to get up.
I'm going to interrupt you though, because as I'm pouring this, boy, it's a really purple color.
Yeah, you can see the color. We'll get into why that's so purple. And, there's a reason for it. And I think I'm going to start digging into it a little bit right here. If you see that purple, magenta, dark, almost opaque color, you can probably, I can blind taste, meaning not even taste the wine, just look at the wine and see that magenta rim and that dark core and say, hey, that might be Argentine Malbec.
Okay.
And there's a reason for it. It's because we're growing Malbec, which is the grape variety, which has good color to the skin. It's originally from Bordeaux, brought by immigrants, French immigrants, and you'd be surprised. Actually, the origins it went from France to Chile and then back over the Andes over to Mendoza. But there's fun history here. But originally a French grape that was grown in Bordeaux, but planted someplace else gives you something completely different. It really, really shines here in this dry climate, high altitude environment that we're going to talk about. Before we get there, it always peeves me when people lump wines from Chile and Argentina, or maybe even earlier Brazil, into one category called South American wines. I have a problem with that because this map here will kind of demonstrate what that problem is, and this line separating the two countries is the delineating factor, and that is the Andes Mountains. And if we look if we looked at the growing climate here in Chile, if my cursor to work again, you see we're all on the coastline here, and it's very Pacific influenced. Very Pacific influence. And the Pacific influence stops on the Andes Mountains. And we find the plateau up here in these regions here at very high altitude. We're talking about 3,000 to 5,000 feet of elevation. And as we move further north, even up to 10,000 feet of elevation, which obviously is different than Pacific sea level here in Chile, or just slightly above. So a dry climate, this rain shadow from the Andes, and really, really high altitude couldn't be different. It'd be like comparing maybe Italy and France as just generally like, oh, they're the same, right? Because they're from Europe. Back that up. So I do not lump Chile and Argentina together. I give both the reserve. We import wines from both countries, so I don't have a favorite. But we will talk about Argentina tonight and focus there. And I will show you what I mean when I mean high altitude, dry climate. So this is a picture of the Uco Valley. So sub-region into Mendoza, this region called the Uco Valley. We're going to get pretty specific with the Santa Julia Reserva because the Uco Valley is special. And it's special because of something like this.
Oh, wow.
And that's the pre-Andes. So, and just look at what the landscape looks like. It's very, very dry. It's a desert. We've got less than 10 inches of rain a year on average generally, more like 8 or 7. And so that means we need to irrigate. And so we irrigate from water that comes from the Andes Mountains, either from the rivers or from aquifers that are underneath. And without that water, you're not growing anything. So only 3% of the land here in Mendoza, that region, and there's a province called Mendoza, only 3% of the land is cultivated with wine, with grapevines, and only due to the fact that we have access to water coming off the Andes. Now that's part of it. And we'll talk about maybe some soil. We have different soil types up here. We won't get too geeky about it, but it's totally inorganic material that came off the Andes Mountains. So really poor soils that are inhospitable. The only things you can really grow up there are like stone fruits, things like cherries and peaches and things like that. Some olive trees will grow up there, and grapevines. So that's kind of what you're talking about, stuff that can sustain these this drought and terrible soils. And one of the founding, like wine in Argentina goes back a long time, and most people know more about Chilean wine, or at least maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, knew more about Chilean wine than they did Argentine wine. And that was, it's a little confusing because really Argentina makes twice as much wine as Chile, but they drank it all there. So it never left the country. In the 1920s, Argentina was one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and per capita consumption of wine is well above any current consumption, like 120 liters per capita, which is above the Vatican, which is like 100 liters. So the huge amounts of wine consumption, great prosperity, huge country, fantastic winemaking tradition, but really a commodity, really, when we think about this. It's like they consider it so ingrained in their culture that I'm going to make horrible comparisons. I'm going to have people from Argentina probably calling me up afterwards, but I would say, culturally, it's like ingrained in us like Coca-Cola. We don't think about like high-end Coca-Cola. We just put it on the table, or maybe it's milk or whatever commodity staple that we put on the table. We're drinking that. We're not thinking that, hey, this has to be a $50 bottle. We're just drinking wine because we drink wine with every meal. And yes, we appreciate the aesthetic of it, but we're not spending $100 on a bottle. We're not spending maybe even $15 on a bottle. It's just part of the culture and part of what we do. Now, when this changed 15 years ago, for a number of reasons, the economy not being the least of it, they had to look to export markets to find homes for all this wine. And they realized the export market, to compete, they needed one, quality. Nobody wants to drink wine that could have been made by their uncle. And they also needed some factor of uniqueness. Well, we happened to hit the nail on the head when they started exporting Malbec. Nobody had really heard of Malbec, but this dark, fruity juice that's in our glasses here appealed to the American palate so much that, boom, takes off.
Now, Lee, when did that happen?
You're talking the mid-'80s with some wine importers that started bringing in Malbec wines. Winesellers was one of the first people on this train, and nobody really imported Argentine wine. We started in 1996 with Santa Julia, the brand that the winery that we're drinking today. And at that time, most people thought.
I was going to say about 12 or 15 years ago was when I started noticing Malbecs, which is one of my favorite wines.
That's my husband's favorite, Malbecs, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We were way ahead of the curve, and we were fortunate enough to ride some of that fun wave. And now, kind of what this family that owns this winery, the Zuccardi family, they're digging into all sorts of really fun stuff. Diversity, uniqueness, identity are words that you would hear more than the word Malbec or juicy, fruity, or, we're talking about trying to create something other than, again, a commodity so that all Malbec tastes the same. We need to make sure, in order for sustainability, that we create a unique identity that people are looking for, rather than kind of what happened to maybe Australian Shiraz. Australian Shiraz became very popular because it was a fruity, easy drinking style. And then all of a sudden, everybody rushed to the market with it. And if I can bring it to market $1 cheaper, then great, people will drink it. And it happens to something like that when you price compete. So unfortunately, Australian Shiraz, which is fantastic and has great diversity, became known as kind of like just juicy, cheap junk that ran its course and was a fad. We don't want to be a fad with Argentine Malbec. So we don't really even talk about Argentine Malbec. We get more specific than Argentina, more specific than Mendoza. We talk about places and identity, maybe the grape itself.
Lee, I'm going to interrupt with a couple of questions. So
Yes,
Miranda
please do.
has a vegetarian with her, so they didn't get any meat to pair with the wine, but they got a pecorino, pepperoncino. Okay. I also got some spicy cheeses. Does that work with the Malbecs?
It depends. I would say probably not. You might want to try the spicy cheeses either with, it depends on what kind of spicy cheese, whether it's a softer or firmer spicy cheese. But I think maybe some of the fruitiness from either the sparkling or the Sauvignon Blanc might work better. That fruitiness and maybe a little bit of residual sugar would counterbalance a little bit of the spice from the cheese itself. My final word is always throw it against the wall and see if it sticks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lee, I've got like a blueberry goat cheese right now that I think is to die for with this right now.
Yeah, certainly. I think there are blueberry characteristics in this wine that mimic what you're tasting in that cheese.
Yeah, I'm almost tasting like cherry, plum, blueberry. Like I've got like a weird fruit palette going on with this. So I went for the goat cheese, and
that cranberry goat cheese.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's like you read my tasting notes for this wine, because really, plum and cherry, and maybe even some of that blueberry are really, really typical fruit profiles for Malbec in general, and maybe this wine specifically too.
Okay, and then Steve wants to know if Malbec is exclusively from Argentina.
No, but it really found its home there, and I would say, 80% of the world's Malbec is probably produced in Argentina. Again, I would have to check statistics, but 3/4 is probably pretty safe. It's the #1 most widely planted grape in Argentina, red or white. There's a little bit, obviously it came from France. It's used generally as a blending grape in Bordeaux. There's a region called Cahors where it's vital, but generally it's relegated to a tertiary role in Bordeaux at best. And Cahors is not really, its international popularity isn't quite the same as maybe Argentine Malbec. There's Malbec grown here in the United States. Any place that really grows Bordeaux varieties will have some level of Malbec, but again, probably not as its featured star, and used as a blending grape.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Let's take a look a little bit about Santa Julia. We mentioned that this person does exist. And
so we love the fact that these are family. I love the fact that these are family-owned vineyards, because the chamber is all about shopping small, right? And the fact that these are wines from around the world, but family-owned, kind of seems like shop small goes global.
Yeah, this is another example of our family-owned company working with another family-owned company, and family-owned companies treating employees like family members. What Santa Julia does, and when we talk about sustainability, is really incredible. They're committed to obviously the land and the environment, but the people are just as important resources to them. So there's really no migratory workers like you would see maybe in California or Europe that come through. A lot of these people are employed year round. There's subsidized healthcare, housing, education, training for them, and encouraging them to move on and getting higher education and maybe even taking other jobs. So really complete holistic view of sustainability and bringing in the human element as well.
That's kind of impressive.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's super impressive. Actually, if you take a look at our website and more of what they do, which is unique to them, but also unique in the wine industry, but I think unique to them too. I don't know a lot of companies, period, agricultural or otherwise, that really have this view and do what they do. So we have an interview with Julio Zuccardi you can find on our YouTube site and our Facebook page. That's very impressive.
Excellent.
And in that range, we mentioned, I said there are organic wines. You can find Santa Julia Organica, as well as the plus range. So these are 3 different price points, 3 different levels of wine, kind of geared towards different consumers. Here at the Reserva level, we'll focus on Reserva means something. Steve asked earlier, what does Reserva mean in Spain? It means something. Typically in the world, it doesn't mean anything. Wineries just slap on Reserva because they want to charge more, and maybe the wine's better, maybe the wine's not better. But there's no necessary definition to it. Argentina recently passed laws that said it has to be released at least a year after harvest or after production. So Reserva has spent some time in barrel and bottle before being released. And here the wine quality is really significantly bigger. We're looking at, like, the wine advocate Robert Parker gave this wine 90 points. James Suckling from the Wine Spectator gave this wine like 92. So really big 90 plus kind of scores for this Reserva Malbec that we're tasting. It's seen 8 to 10 months and mostly French oak, mostly used French oak. And as you can taste, you saw the color on it, which generally tells that there's intensity to it. And that intensity comes about because of low yields, but that high altitude with that Malbec grape really produce those dark, deep, intense colors and those really intense flavors, really kind of what I would call developed flavors. So really complex, mature flavors. The tannins are there, that bitterness that red wines, the bite that red wines have, but they're soft, if that makes sense. They're kind of velvety. They're not small, bitey, and green. They're
it's not bitey.
smoother. Yeah,
Very smooth.
and there's plenty of acidity for me too that helps balance out this juicy fruitiness. I promised myself I wouldn't say juicy, but it's really a good descriptor for kind of how this wine tastes to me. It tastes like freshly macerated plums, blueberries, cherries, right?
Yeah. It's amazing.
And so that's the 2018 Malbec for us. Food pairings. What we do in Argentina is we do what they call an asado, which is what Americans would call a barbecue, but they do it in their own way. And it's really more of an experience than it is about the food. Obviously, it requires an open flame. But really, that's just the beginning of it. It's really more of a social, cultural experience where it's an opportunity to open a bottle of wine and share the day, the week, your thoughts with friends and family, and taste a variety of things that come off that empanadas out of the oven. And this thing pairs with anything off the grill. So we mentioned burgers, but I think it could go richer than that. Things like typically in Argentina, like blood sausage would be what we pair with that. That doesn't culturally translate, but how about regular sausages, right? So pork sausages off the grill, that stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah, and this is a wine that occasionally I will try wine without food. Maybe I'm watching TV or a sporting event or whatever is on the TV at night, and I'm not actually having food with it. I think wine and food pairings are the 1 + 1 = 3. But sometimes I do try without food, and this is a wine that I like with food and without food because of that fruit profile.
I would agree. This is a good wind down after a work day.
Yes. Yeah. Anybody who's watching have any opinions? Christine, what do you think of this wine? See if she's still with us. There's a reason Malbec's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's full without being flabby. There's a lot of wines that taste full out there, meaning full-bodied, they're fruity, they're forward, they feel lush in the mouth. But for me, they lack a component that counterbalances all that juiciness, let's say, which is the structural components, which is the acid and the tannin. And this wine has all those components for me, so it has balance.
Yeah.
I won't pick on anybody's wine out there, but there's a lot of red blends out there at the under $10, and even at the over $10, that are all about delivering what people think they want in wine, which is the fruity, easy drinking, kind of jammy experience. And those wines don't really do much for me because they're too one-dimensional.
Okay. Good to know.
Those things you see end cap that have omnivore or some sort of vor in their name, right? I won't. There's a number of them, so I'm not picking on anyone in specifically. But, and they're very aggressively packaged because they're big, bold, and attack the palate. And they're dark this or dark that. That's another good marketing term for that style of wine, or really just red blend in general. If you see red blend prominently featured on that, it's going to be that style of wine. And I like my wine with a little bit more balance to it, maybe some more complexity than just delivering kind of like blueberry jam or blackberry jam or whatever kind of overripe fruit. And sometimes very sweet for me.
I can't get over the purple color of this. I just can't. It's so intense.
Yeah, it's that elevation. So we have great luminosity at 3,000 to 5,000 feet of elevation, and the skins is where you get all that color from, and the skins react to that level of luminosity. So they hang on the vines for a long time, longer than maybe other places, because it's a relatively cool climate. So we slowly reach sugar ripeness, and what we get is phenolic ripeness, or ripeness in the skins happening. So we get a lot more ripeness in the skins. So these polyphenols that we're looking at and that we're tasting in the wine, along with the tannins that we're tasting in the wine, have a chance to develop. And that's where all that color intensity comes from.
Excellent. All right. We are at about 10 after 6. So I'm going to just kind of ask if we have any other questions. And we'll wait a second.
And while we're doing that, I think I have one more slide with my contact information up there. You can find us at winesellersltd.com. My personal.
I love the picture with the purple tongue.
Yeah, that's Sebastian's. So that's Julie's brother, and
I love it.
He is winemaker extraordinaire. I learned more from him than I do most of my other winemakers. I actually worked harvest with him and his team down there in Argentina last year in March, April. And it was a fantastic experience. But that's what happens when you're tasting grapes. You go through the vineyard around harvest time, and you have analytics that you do. And some of the analytics are pH, TA, and sugar densities. But realistically, that's just like it tells you when you think you want to harvest. The real fine tuning is going through the vineyard and actually collecting going down and tasting berry by berry, going, is this ready? How does it feel? What's the tannin structure like? And really, it's an art. There is science, but there's still an art, and that's art on his tongue.
Excellent. Well, Lee, I'm going to echo what Steve said. This was a fabulous tasting. Thank you very much. We are going to say goodbye for this evening, but maybe we will see Lee again.
Thank you for everything.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for watching.